My name is Rachel Morgan, and I'm 32 years old. 3 weeks ago, I woke up alone in a hospital room after a near-fatal car crash. My first thought was about my parents, wondering why they weren't there. Then my phone rang. It was my brother Ethan's wife, Ashley, explaining that my parents couldn't visit because they were attending Ethan's business award ceremony in Phoenix. That hurt worse than my broken ribs. But what they're asking for now? It feels like betrayal all over again. Before I tell you how this nightmare unfolded, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you want more stories about standing your ground against family manipulation. Growing up in suburban Minneapolis, I always felt our family was picture perfect. My parents, Diana and Richard Morgan, were hardworking people who built successful careers in finance. Dad worked as a senior investment advisor at a respected firm while Mom managed the regional branch of a national bank. They weren't wealthy from inherited money, but they created a comfortable upper-middle-class life through decades of smart decisions and careful planning. My brother Ethan is 2 years younger than me. From early childhood, he had this effortless charm that people just gravitated toward. While I was the studious, responsible one who followed rules and worked methodically, Ethan was charismatic and spontaneous. He could talk his way out of trouble with a smile that made everyone forget whatever mistake he'd made minutes earlier. Despite our different personalities, we were close as children. I'd help him with homework while he'd include me in social activities I might otherwise have missed because of my natural shyness. Our parents seemed to treat us equally, at least on the surface. They attended my academic competitions with the same enthusiasm they showed at Ethan's football games. Family dinners were lively affairs where we all shared our daily triumphs and challenges. I excelled academically, eventually earning a scholarship to Northwestern University where I studied economics and accounting. Following my parents' footsteps into finance seemed natural, and they appeared proud when I declared my major. Dad would send me articles about financial trends, and Mom would call weekly to discuss my classes in detail. Meanwhile, Ethan attended University of Minnesota, changing majors 3 times before settling on business management. His grades were average, but his networking skills were exceptional. He joined every club, made connections with professors, and always seemed to land internships through people he met at parties or campus events. The summer after my junior year, I interned at a prestigious accounting firm in Chicago. The work was demanding, requiring 60-hour weeks and meticulous attention to detail. While I was building my resume with substantive experience, Ethan landed a marketing internship through Dad's golf buddy. He spent most of that summer posting on social media and attending networking events that looked more like parties than work. When I mentioned the disparity to Mom during a weekend visit home, she brushed it off with, "Everyone finds success their own way, honey. Ethan's people skills will take him far." It seemed reasonable enough at the time. After graduation, I accepted a position at Henderson Financial Partners in Minneapolis, wanting to be near family while building my career. The starting salary was modest, but the firm had an excellent reputation and clear advancement paths. I rented a small apartment, lived frugally, and began systematically building my savings. Ethan's post-college trajectory was less structured. He worked briefly for Dad's friend's marketing company, then jumped to a startup that failed within 8 months, followed by a series of jobs he always described as stepping stones to something better. Despite his irregular employment history, he maintained an expensive lifestyle, driving a leased luxury car and renting a downtown loft he could barely afford. Our parents never seemed concerned about his financial decisions. When he needed money for rent after splurging on a vacation to Cancun, Mom quietly transferred funds to his account. When he wanted to invest in a friend's dubious business venture, Dad wrote the check while cautioning me about high-risk investments when I mentioned putting some of my savings in a diversified stock portfolio. Still, family gatherings remained pleasant. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and personal milestones together. I was genuinely happy when Ethan met Ashley during a business conference 3 years ago. She was smart, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and seemed to provide some stability in his life. When they married after a whirlwind 6-month romance, our parents spared no expense for the wedding. My relationship with Ethan's new wife started warmly. Ashley and I would meet for coffee when she wanted financial advice or help planning surprise gifts for my brother. She seemed to appreciate my practical nature and organizational skills, often joking that she married the charming Morgan but sometimes needed the sensible one. Around this time, I started dating Marcus, a software engineer I met through a mutual friend. Unlike my previous boyfriends, Marcus immediately clicked with my family. Dad appreciated his analytical mind, Mom loved his polite manners, and Ethan found a willing participant for his fantasy football league. For once, everything in my personal and family life seemed perfectly aligned. When I earned my first major promotion at Henderson Financial, my parents hosted a beautiful dinner celebration. Dad toasted my dedication and intelligence, while Mom got teary-eyed talking about how proud they were. Even Ethan seemed genuinely happy for me, though he quickly turned the conversation to his new position at Vertex Innovations, a fast-growing tech company where he'd recently been hired in business development. 2 weeks later, at Ethan and Ashley's housewarming party for their new suburban home, I noticed my parents had given them an expensive painting as a gift, considerably more lavish than the restaurant gift card they'd given me for my promotion. I pushed away the slight twinge of hurt, telling myself I was being petty. After all, a first home was a bigger milestone than a promotion. The first real crack in our family harmony appeared during Thanksgiving dinner that year. Mom casually mentioned they'd helped Ethan with the down payment on his house. This was surprising news since they'd repeatedly told me their philosophy was that adult children should make their own way financially. When I later asked about the apparent double standard, Dad became uncharacteristically defensive. "Your brother has a family to support now," he said, though Ashley's pharmaceutical sales job actually paid more than Ethan's position. "Besides, you're so good with money, Rachel. You don't need our help like Ethan does." It was the first time I realized that my financial responsibility had somehow become a justification for treating me differently than my brother. Still, I rationalized their behavior, telling myself parents sometimes make imperfect decisions while trying to meet different children's needs. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a pattern that would eventually shatter my perception of our family entirely. The initial cracks in my relationship with my parents widened the following spring when I caught a severe case of pneumonia that landed me in the hospital for 4 days. Marcus visited daily, bringing books and keeping me company despite his busy work schedule. My best friend Jessica brought homemade soup when I returned home and checked on me regularly. My parents, however, called just once and sent flowers instead of visiting, explaining they had tickets to a charity gala that Ethan had invited them to. "We don't want to risk catching anything before the event," Mom explained. "Ethan says there will be important connections there for his career." I told myself not to be childish about it. After all, I was an adult, not a little girl who needed her parents at her bedside. Still, when I saw photos on social media of them dressed up and smiling broadly with Ethan and Ashley at the gala, something inside me ached. 2 months later, I received wonderful news. Henderson Financial had selected me for their advanced leadership program, a prestigious opportunity that only 2 employees received each year. I called my parents immediately, excited to share my accomplishment. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, sounding distracted. "Can I call you back? We're just heading out the door to see Ethan's new office. He got that promotion he was hoping for." When she called back that evening, she spent 20 minutes describing Ethan's corner office view and the impressive title on his new business cards before asking any details about my leadership program. For my 31st birthday, I planned a small dinner at my favorite restaurant with my parents, Ethan, Ashley, Marcus, and a few close friends. 2 days before the event, Mom called to ask if we could reschedule. "Ethan just found out he's receiving the Rising Star Award from the Business Association that night," she explained. "The ceremony conflicts with your dinner. Would you mind moving your celebration? This is such an important recognition for your brother." I swallowed my disappointment and rescheduled, telling myself the actual date didn't matter. But when the rescheduled dinner finally happened a week later, my parents arrived late and left early, explaining they had promised to babysit for friends. "Your brother's award ceremony was exhausting," Mom confided as they were leaving. "But so worth it. The networking opportunities for him were incredible." That summer, Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Superior. When I called my parents with the news, their response was lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's wonderful," Mom said, without the excitement I'd expected. "Have you set a date yet? You might want to coordinate with Ashley. She just told us she and Ethan are trying for a baby, so you wouldn't want your wedding to conflict with a pregnancy or a newborn." I hadn't even accepted the ring yet, and already my engagement was being treated as a scheduling inconvenience around Ethan's family planning. The real turning point came during the annual family 4th of July barbecue at my parents' home. During dinner, Dad proudly announced they were gifting Ethan and Ashley $20,000 to start a college fund for their future child. "We want to be the kind of grandparents who invest in our grandchildren's future," Dad said, raising a toast. Later, when I helped Mom with dishes, I carefully broached the subject. "That was really generous of you and Dad. Will you be doing something similar when Marcus and I have children?" Mom's expression changed instantly. "Rachel, you make good money and Marcus is in tech. You'll be fine. Ethan and Ashley need more help getting established." I couldn't hide my hurt. "Mom, Ethan and Ashley together make more than Marcus and I do. And they live in a house you helped them buy while we're still saving for a down payment." "Don't be selfish, Rachel," she snapped. "Your brother has always needed more support. You've always been independent. It's not about money, it's about recognizing different needs." But it was about money. It was about the consistent pattern of financial and emotional investment my parents made in Ethan's life while expecting me to be satisfied with scraps of their attention and resources. The final blow came when I learned my parents had created a trust fund for Ethan's future children but had made no similar provisions for any children Marcus and I might have. When I discovered this through an accidental comment by their estate attorney at a holiday party, I finally confronted them directly. "We didn't think you'd mind," Dad said defensively. "You're always so rational about money. Ethan is more emotional." "And what about my emotions?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Do they not matter because I don't throw tantrums when I don't get what I want?" My mother's response haunts me still. "Rachel, you've always been our strong one. Ethan needs us more than you do." In that moment, I realized a painful truth. My competence had become my curse. By being responsible, I had somehow forfeited my right to equal treatment in my parents' eyes. The months following that confrontation were tense. My parents began declining my invitations for dinner, always with plausible excuses that somehow involved Ethan's activities or needs. When we did see each other at family gatherings, conversation was strained, with Mom and Dad lavishing attention on Ethan and Ashley while treating me with polite distance. Meanwhile, Marcus and I began planning our wedding. When I mentioned having the ceremony at my parents' lakeside cabin, a spot that held precious childhood memories for me, Mom hesitated. "We were thinking of letting Ethan and Ashley use it for an extended vacation this summer," she said. "Ashley's been so stressed with work, and they need time away. Maybe you could find a nice hotel venue instead." The message was clear. Ethan's vacation took priority over my wedding. We booked a charming historic Inn instead, stretching our budget considerably. When it came time to discuss the guest list, my parents insisted on inviting numerous friends and associates of Ethan's who I barely knew. "These connections could be so valuable for his career," Dad explained. When I pointed out that the additional guests would cost us thousands we hadn't budgeted for, he waved away my concern without offering financial assistance. 2 months before the wedding, Ashley announced she was pregnant. Immediately, all family attention shifted to the news. My bridal shower, which Mom had promised to host, was hastily rescheduled because it conflicted with Ashley's first ultrasound appointment. "Everyone wants to be there for that first glimpse of the baby," Mom explained, as if I should understand that seeing a grainy ultrasound image was more important than the celebration she'd promised me months ago. The shower, when it finally happened, felt like an afterthought. Mom spent most of the event talking about becoming a grandmother, while Ashley received congratulations from guests who were supposed to be celebrating my upcoming marriage. 1 week before my wedding day, disaster struck. While driving home from a late work meeting, a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into my car at an intersection. I was rushed to Minneapolis General Hospital with a concussion, 3 broken ribs, a broken wrist, and numerous lacerations. Marcus, who had been at home waiting for me, received the call from emergency services and rushed to the hospital. In the chaos and pain of the emergency room, I kept asking for my parents. Marcus called them repeatedly, leaving increasingly urgent messages. 6 hours after the accident, while I was being prepped for surgery to repair my wrist, Ashley finally called Marcus. What she told him left him speechless. My parents had received his messages, but had decided not to come to the hospital because they were already in Phoenix for Ethan's Entrepreneur of the Year award ceremony. They said they'll try to get a flight back tomorrow after the ceremony, Ashley explained. Diana thinks Rachel will understand that they can't miss Ethan's big moment. It's such an important recognition for his career. When I woke from surgery, groggy and in pain, Marcus couldn't bring himself to tell me the truth. It was only the next day, when my parents still hadn't arrived, that Ashley called me directly. "Rachel, I'm so sorry about your accident," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "Your parents wanted me to tell you they're very concerned, but they can't get a flight back until tomorrow. Ethan's award ceremony is tonight, and you know how these networking events are crucial for his position at Vertex." The pain that washed over me had nothing to do with my physical injuries. My brother's award ceremony took precedence over my hospitalization after a near-fatal accident. In that moment, the last illusion I had about my place in my family shattered completely. "I understand," I said flatly, and hung up. Marcus witnessed my heartbreak and was furious on my behalf. "This is beyond unacceptable," he said, holding my uninjured hand. How could they prioritize a ceremony over their injured daughter? When my parents finally arrived at the hospital the following evening, they brought flowers and apologies that sounded rehearsed. "We knew Marcus was with you," Mom said, as if that justified their absence. "And the doctors said you were stable." Dad added, "Ethan's award was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There were investors there he's been trying to meet for months." I looked at these people who had raised me, who I'd spent my life trying to make proud, and felt nothing but a hollow ache. "I could have died," I said quietly. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by my mother changing the subject to how beautiful the awards ceremony had been and how many important business contacts had approached Ethan afterward. My wedding had to be postponed due to my injuries. When we finally rescheduled for 3 months later, it was a much smaller affair than originally planned. Many guests couldn't make the new date, and honestly, I preferred it that way. The ceremony was intimate and meaningful, focused on Marcus and me rather than impressing my parents' social circle or providing networking opportunities for Ethan. My parents attended, of course, but something fundamental had changed. I no longer looked to them for approval or validation. I no longer felt the need to justify my choices or compete for their attention. The accident and their response to it had severed something deep within me, replacing desperate hope with clear-eyed acceptance of what my family truly was. After the wedding, Marcus and I decided to move to Chicago for his new job opportunity. My firm had an office there and they were willing to transfer me. The distance from Minneapolis felt necessary for my emotional healing. The night before our move, Ethan called unexpectedly. "Rachel, I know things have been weird," he began awkwardly, "but I want you to know I'm sorry about what happened with your accident. I told Mom and Dad they should have come immediately. It was the first genuine moment between us in years." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, surprised by his apparent self-awareness. "Yeah, well." He hesitated. "Family should come first. And speaking of family, I'm having a bit of a situation at work. Nothing serious, just some cash flow issues with one of my projects. I was wondering if you might be able to loan me $15,000 until my next bonus? Mom and Dad would help, but they just put money down on a vacation property." And just like that, the moment of connection evaporated. Even Ethan's rare apology was simply a prelude to asking for money. I declined politely but firmly, citing our moving expenses. What I didn't tell him was that I'd been building my savings specifically to create the financial independence I now recognized was essential to my well-being. Never again would I be in a position where I needed to rely on family members who had repeatedly shown me where I ranked in their priorities. Little did I know then that Ethan's cash flow issues were the first tremors of a much larger catastrophe headed our way. Our first 6 months in Chicago were healing. Marcus thrived at his new tech company, while I quickly earned respect at the regional office of Henderson Financial. We found a cozy apartment in Lincoln Park and began building a social circle that included colleagues and neighbors who became genuine friends. The distance from my family provided perspective. Weekly calls with my parents became monthly, then occasional. They were always busy with Ethan and Ashley's baby preparations, or helping them renovate their home. I stopped expecting them to ask about my life and instead shared my news with people who genuinely cared. In November, Ashley gave birth to a baby boy they named Richard after my father. My parents immediately flew to Minneapolis and stayed for 3 weeks to help the new parents. I sent a generous gift basket and made appropriate congratulatory calls, but declined their suggestion that I use my vacation days to join them. "I'm sorry, but we've already planned a trip to New York that week," I explained, which was true. Marcus had surprised me with Broadway tickets for our first anniversary. Dad sounded disappointed. "This is your nephew, Rachel. Family should come first." The irony of him saying those words to me was apparently lost on him. Christmas came, and we declined the invitation to Minneapolis, choosing instead to host Marcus's parents in Chicago. It was our first holiday away from my family, and the lack of tension made it the most enjoyable Christmas I'd had in years. In February, an unexpected email arrived from a former colleague at my Minneapolis office. The message was cryptic. "You might want to check into what your brother's been doing at Vertex. There are rumors circulating in the financial community." Concerned, I did some research. Vertex Innovations had recently announced a revolutionary new software platform that promised to transform supply chain management. Their stock had soared, and Ethan had been prominently featured in business publications as the development team leader who had secured major clients for the initial rollout. Something about the coverage felt off. Ethan had never demonstrated technical knowledge or project management skills that would qualify him to lead such an initiative. I reached out to industry contacts, making casual inquiries about Vertex's new platform. The responses were concerning. No one had seen a working demonstration of the software. The major clients Ethan claimed to have secured wouldn't confirm their partnerships when contacted by industry analysts. Yet investment money was pouring in based on press releases and Ethan's charismatic media appearances. I debated whether to contact my brother directly with my concerns, but decided against it. Our relationship had deteriorated too much for him to receive such questions as anything but criticism or jealousy. In March, while Marcus and I were enjoying a rare weekend without work commitments, my phone rang with my father's number. It was unusual for him to call rather than text, especially on a Saturday. "Rachel," he began without preamble, his voice tight with stress. "We need your help. There's a situation with Ethan." The situation, as it turned out, was that the Securities and Exchange Commission had launched an investigation into Vertex Innovations for possible securities fraud. The revolutionary software that had attracted millions in investment didn't actually exist in any functional form. The company had been operating essentially as a Ponzi scheme, using new investment to pay earlier investors while creating the illusion of a thriving business. Ethan, as the public face of the fraudulent product, was directly implicated. His emails and presentations had made claims he knew were false. He was facing potential criminal charges. "He made some mistakes," Dad said, his voice breaking. But he didn't understand the legal implications. He was just doing what his bosses told him to do. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. My brother had participated in defrauding investors of millions of dollars, and my father was characterizing it as mistakes. What does this have to do with me? I finally asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Ethan needs to hire the best defense attorney in Minneapolis, someone who specializes in securities law," Mom interjected, apparently on speakerphone. "The retainer is $300,000. I nearly dropped my phone. "And you're calling me because—" "We've put everything we can into it already," Dad explained. "We've taken a second mortgage on the house and liquidated most of our investments. but we're still 100,000 short. The implication hung in the air between us. You want me to give you $100,000 for Ethan's legal defense? I clarified, my voice hollow. Not give, Mom quickly corrected.
Loan.
Once this is all cleared up, he'll pay you back. We all will. Marcus, who had been listening to my side of the conversation with increasing concern, took my hand and squeezed it supportively. I don't have that kind of money just sitting around, I said, which wasn't entirely true. Between our wedding savings that we'd never fully used due to downsizing the event, my performance bonuses, and careful investing, Marcus and I had just over $120,000 in our joint savings account. It was our house down payment fund, the future we'd been carefully building together. Rachel, this is your brother we're talking about, Mom's voice sharpened. He could go to prison. What's more important, a future house or your brother's freedom? The question struck me like a physical blow. What about when I was lying in a hospital bed? What had been more important then, their daughter's well-being or their son's award ceremony? I need to discuss this with Marcus, I said finally. This would affect both of us. What's there to discuss? Dad demanded. This is family. You do what you have to do for family. After promising to call them back, I hung up and turned to Marcus, who had heard enough to understand the situation. They're unbelievable, he said, shaking his head. They ignore you when you need them, then expect you to empty your savings when Ethan needs bailing out from his own fraud scheme? We spent the weekend researching securities fraud cases and the likely outcomes. The evidence against Vertex and its executives appeared damning. Even with the best attorney, Ethan was likely facing significant penalties or even jail time if the allegations were true. More disturbing was what we discovered about Ethan's personal finances. Despite his supposedly successful career, he and Ashley had accumulated massive debt. Their mortgage was underwater. They had multiple maxed-out credit cards. They had borrowed against the title of their luxury vehicles. They had even taken loans against the trust fund my parents had established for their son. They've been living completely beyond their means, Marcus said as we reviewed the public records. Even without the legal troubles, they were heading for financial disaster. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. I called my parents back. I've thought about your request, I began carefully, and I'm sorry, but I can't give you $100,000. The explosion was immediate. Dad called me selfish and heartless. Mom cried and asked what they had done to deserve such an ungrateful daughter. They reminded me of all they had done for me growing up, conveniently forgetting the years of favoritism toward Ethan. If you won't help your brother, then don't consider yourself part of this family anymore, Dad finally said, his voice cold with fury. After they hung up, I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. Marcus held me as I processed the fact that I had just been disowned for refusing to sacrifice my financial security to rescue my brother from the consequences of his own fraudulent actions. The next morning, I received a text from Ashley. I always knew you were jealous of Ethan's success. Now you're enjoying watching him suffer. I hope you're happy with yourself. I blocked her number without responding. That evening, Ethan himself called. Unlike our parents, he didn't yell or make demands. His voice was subdued, almost humble. I understand why you won't help, he said quietly. I wouldn't help me either if I were you. The admission was so unexpected that I found myself speechless. I really messed up, Rachel, he continued. I got in over my head, started believing my own hype. Now everything's falling apart, and I'm dragging everyone down with me. For the first time in years, I heard genuine remorse in my brother's voice. No manipulation, no charm, just raw honesty. I'm sorry about your accident, he added. I should have made Mom and Dad go to the hospital. I knew it was wrong when they stayed for my stupid award thing. I felt tears welling up again. But these were different. There was sadness, but also a strange sense of relief at finally hearing the truth acknowledged. Thank you for saying that. I managed. I don't expect your forgiveness, Ethan said. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. How they always favored me. How I took advantage of it. How unfair it all was to you. After we hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, processing the conversation. It didn't change my decision about the money, but it shifted something inside me. For the first time, I felt compassion for my brother rather than resentment. He had been shaped by our parents' favoritism as much as I had, just in different ways. That night, I wrote a long email to my parents. I explained calmly why I couldn't provide the money they wanted, but also expressed my hope that someday we might rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. I acknowledged that I loved them despite everything and wished them strength through the difficult times ahead. I never received a reply. The weeks following my parents' ultimatum were surprisingly peaceful. After years of seeking their approval and being disappointed, there was a certain relief in stepping away from the dysfunction entirely. Marcus and I continued building our life in Chicago. I threw myself into work, earning another promotion that came with a significant salary increase. We began seriously house hunting, focusing on neighborhoods with good schools for the family we hoped to start soon. 3 months passed without contact from my parents. Through mutual family friends, I heard that Ethan had been formally charged with securities fraud and wire fraud. Vertex Innovations had collapsed, with its executives facing both criminal charges and civil lawsuits from defrauded investors. In June, an unexpected call came from my cousin Stephanie, my mother's niece who lived in Minneapolis. "Rachel, I think you should know that Aunt Diana has been behaving strangely," she began hesitantly. "She seems confused sometimes, forgets conversations we've just had, gets angry for no reason." My first thought was that the stress of Ethan's legal troubles was affecting her mental health. But as Stephanie continued describing incidents, a more concerning picture emerged. "Uncle Richard seems to be covering for her," Stephanie added. "He finishes her sentences, makes excuses when she forgets things, gets defensive when anyone mentions the memory lapses." I thanked Stephanie for the information but wasn't sure what to do with it. My parents had made it clear they didn't want me in their lives unless I was willing to sacrifice my savings for Ethan's defense. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a Minneapolis number I didn't recognize. It was Margaret Wilson, my parents' next-door neighbor for over 20 years. "Rachel, I hope you don't mind me calling," she began. "Your mother gave me your number years ago for emergency purposes. I'm worried about her." Margaret described finding my mother wandering in her bathrobe, confused about where she was. When Margaret brought her home, my father had been frantic with worry but refused Margaret's suggestion to take Mom to a doctor. He kept saying it was just stress about Ethan's situation, Margaret explained. "But Rachel, I've known your mother for decades. This isn't stress. Something medical is happening, and Richard is in denial." This time, I couldn't ignore the warning. Despite everything, these were still my parents. I called my father immediately, but he dismissed my concerns. "Your mother is fine," he insisted. "We don't need your amateur diagnosis from hundreds of miles away." After that conversation, I knew I needed to see the situation for myself. I took a Friday off work and flew to Minneapolis without warning them. When I arrived at their house, I was shocked by what I found. The normally immaculate home was cluttered and disorganized. Dishes were piled in the sink, mail was stacked unopened on the counter, and there was a general sense of neglect throughout. My mother, always meticulously groomed, was wearing mismatched clothes with uncombed hair. Most alarming was her reaction to seeing me. There was a moment of confusion in her eyes before recognition dawned. "Rachel," she said hesitantly, "what are you doing here? Is it Christmas already?" My father appeared from his study, clearly surprised and uncomfortable with my presence. "Rachel, you should have called first." I pulled him aside while Mom made tea, her movements slow and uncertain. "Dad, something is seriously wrong with Mom," I said firmly. "This isn't about Ethan or our disagreement. She needs medical attention." His face crumpled suddenly, the facade of control disappearing. "I know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "But with everything happening with Ethan, I didn't know how to handle another crisis. I've been trying to manage on my own." That weekend was a turning point. I helped clean the house, sorted through the neglected mail, and most importantly, convinced my father to schedule a comprehensive medical evaluation for my mother. The diagnosis came 2 weeks later, early onset Alzheimer's disease. The neurologist estimated the symptoms had likely been present for at least a year, possibly longer, but had accelerated in recent months, potentially triggered by the stress of Ethan's legal troubles. I took a temporary leave from work and moved back to Minneapolis to help my father navigate the new reality of my mother's condition. The conflict over Ethan's legal fund seemed insignificant in the face of this much larger family crisis. During this time, I also reconnected with Ethan. His legal situation was proceeding, with a plea deal being negotiated that would likely include some jail time, but substantially less than if he went to trial and lost. "I deserve whatever happens," he told me during a coffee meeting. I knew what we were doing wasn't right, but I convinced myself it was just aggressive marketing, not fraud. The Ethan sitting across from me was dramatically different from the confident, charming brother I'd known all my life. This version was humbled, reflective, and genuinely remorseful. While helping organize my parents' paperwork to ensure bills were being paid and medical information was properly filed, I discovered something disturbing. Their finances were in shambles. They had indeed taken a second mortgage on their home, but they had also drained their retirement accounts, incurring substantial penalties in the process. Most alarming, they had taken high-interest loans from questionable lenders. "Dad, what were you thinking?" I asked, showing him the documentation. He looked away, ashamed. Ethan kept saying he just needed a little more for the legal fund, that his lawyer was close to getting all charges dropped. I believed him. I always believed him. The truth was becoming clear. My brother had continued manipulating our parents even as his fraud case proceeded, extracting money they couldn't afford to give. Whether he intended to repay them or not was irrelevant. The damage was done. With my father's reluctant permission, I contacted a financial advisor friend to help assess the full extent of the damage and develop a recovery plan. The news wasn't good. My parents were on the verge of bankruptcy, with their home at risk of foreclosure. Marcus flew in for a weekend, and we had a serious discussion about our options. Without hesitation, he supported my decision to use a portion of our savings to stabilize my parents' immediate financial situation while longer-term solutions were developed. "This is different than Ethan's legal fund," he said. "This is about your mother's care and your parents' basic security. We can delay our house purchase." I was overwhelmed by his generosity and understanding. This wasn't enabling bad behavior. It was responding to a genuine health crisis with compassion. When I presented the offer to my father, he broke down completely. "After how we treated you," he sobbed, "how we favored Ethan, how we asked you for money for his legal problems but ignored you when you were hurt, how can you possibly want to help us now?" "Because that's what family really does," I answered simply. "Not enabling harmful behavior, but being there in genuine times of need." That evening, as I sat with my mother helping her sort through old photographs she sometimes recognized and sometimes didn't, she had a moment of clarity. "We failed you, Rachel," she said suddenly, her eyes focused and present in a way they often weren't anymore. "We always expected more from you, and gave more to him. It wasn't fair." I held her hand, tears streaming down my face at this unexpected moment of acknowledgement. "I always knew you were the strong one," she continued, "but we shouldn't have taken that for granted." The moment passed quickly, her thoughts drifting again to confused memories, but I held those words close. They didn't erase years of hurt, but they were a balm I hadn't known I needed. While helping stabilize my parents' immediate financial situation, I began a more thorough investigation into exactly how they had ended up in such dire straits. The picture that emerged was more complex and disturbing than I initially realized. Beyond the second mortgage and emptied retirement accounts I'd already discovered, there were multiple high-interest loans taken out over the past year. Most concerning were several documents bearing my mother's signature from periods when, according to her medical records, she was already experiencing significant cognitive decline. My father, overwhelmed by Ethan's legal troubles and my mother's deteriorating condition, had allowed Ethan to handle many financial matters directly. Whether through deliberate manipulation or desperate self-delusion, my brother had continued extracting money from our parents long after it was clear they had nothing left to give. I consulted discreetly with a lawyer friend, Daniela, who specialized in elder financial abuse. She reviewed the documents with growing concern. These signatures are questionable, she noted. And several of these financial decisions were made when your mother's capacity to consent was likely already compromised. There's a strong case for financial exploitation here. I was stunned by the implication. Are you saying Ethan was knowingly exploiting Mom's condition to get money? Daniela's expression was grave. I can't determine intent, but the pattern is troubling. At minimum, there was gross negligence in obtaining financial commitments from someone with diminished capacity. The revelation sickened me. It was one thing for Ethan to make poor decisions in his business dealings, but quite another to potentially exploit our mother's medical condition for financial gain. I decided to confront my brother directly. We met at a quiet cafe where I laid out what I discovered. I didn't know how bad Mom was, he insisted, his face pale. Dad never said anything about dementia or Alzheimer's. He just said she was stressed and forgetful. But you knew something wasn't right, I pressed. You had to notice the confusion, the memory problems. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I was desperate, Rachel. The legal bills kept mounting. Investors were threatening personal lawsuits. Ashley was talking about taking Richard and leaving. I convinced myself Mom was just tired or distracted. I wanted to believe him, but years of witnessing his ability to charm and manipulate made me cautious. These loans have destroyed their retirement security, Ethan. They could lose their home because of what you've done. I know, he whispered. I've ruined everything for everyone. His apparent remorse seemed genuine, but I'd seen this performance before. The difference was that this time, I wasn't willing to let it end with tears and vague promises. Here's what's going to happen, I said firmly. You're going to sign a legal acknowledgement that these debts are yours, not Mom and Dad's. You're going to work with Daniela to legally transfer responsibility to yourself. And you're going to come clean to Dad about everything. To my surprise, Ethan agreed without argument. I'll do whatever you think is right. I'm done running from what I've done. The next phase was even more difficult, helping my father understand the full extent of the financial exploitation that had occurred. Initially defensive and in denial, he gradually came to accept the painful truth as I showed him document after document. I failed your mother, he said, his voice hollow. I was so focused on protecting Ethan that I didn't protect her when she needed me most. With Dad's cooperation, we began the process of legally documenting the financial transactions and creating a record that could potentially help recover some funds. We also established proper guardianship arrangements to protect my mother's interests going forward. During this process, I discovered something unexpected. Before her cognitive decline had become severe, my mother had apparently harbored concerns about Ethan's influence over their finances. I found notes in her personal planner referring to appointments with their family attorney that my father knew nothing about. Curious, I contacted Lawrence Green, who had handled my parents' legal affairs for decades. Initially hesitant to discuss confidential matters, he agreed to meet when I explained the guardianship situation and my concerns about financial exploitation. Your mother came to see me about 8 months ago, Lawrence confirmed during our meeting. She was worried about the amount of money flowing to Ethan and wanted to put some protections in place. What kind of protections? I asked. She created a separate trust with some family assets that couldn't be accessed for Ethan's benefit, he explained. She was quite explicit that these resources were to be preserved for long-term care needs and eventually split equally between you and Ethan, regardless of any family pressures that might arise. I was stunned. Dad never mentioned this trust. Lawrence's expression was sympathetic but unsurprised.
He may not know about it.
Your mother requested confidentiality, even from your father. She said he couldn't be objective where Ethan was concerned. The revelation was bittersweet. Even as her mind was beginning to fail her, my mother had recognized the damaging pattern and taken steps to protect some family resources. She had seen the truth, but hadn't been able to fully address it before her condition deteriorated. Lawrence provided the documentation for the trust, which contained about $200,000 in assets that had been protected from the financial disaster Ethan had created. It wasn't enough to solve all my parents' financial problems, but combined with the support Marcus and I could provide, it offered a path to stability. There's something else, Lawrence added, pulling another folder from his desk. Your mother also recorded a video statement when she established the trust. She asked that it be shared with you if circumstances like these ever arose. He handed me a flash drive. I'd suggest watching this privately. That evening, alone in my childhood bedroom, I plugged the drive into my laptop. My mother's face appeared on screen, recorded many months ago but noticeably more alert and present than she was now. Rachel, if you're watching this, it means things have happened as I feared they might, she began. I want you to know that despite appearances, I've always seen the truth about both my children. Tears streamed down my face as she continued. I've allowed your father's favoritism toward Ethan to go unchallenged for too long. I've participated in it myself, telling myself we were just responding to different needs. But the truth is, we've enabled behavior in Ethan that has harmed him as much as it has hurt you. She detailed how she had watched me build my life independently while Ethan became increasingly dependent and entitled. She acknowledged the pain they had caused me through years of unequal treatment, culminating in the unforgivable decision to attend Ethan's award ceremony instead of coming to the hospital after my accident. I have no excuse for that, she said, her voice breaking. It was the moment I finally recognized how profoundly we had failed you as parents. I began making these arrangements shortly afterward, though I didn't have the courage to address it directly with you or your father. She explained that she had begun noticing changes in her memory and cognitive function, which had prompted her urgency in establishing the trust. I fear I may not be able to make these decisions much longer, she said with remarkable self-awareness. My doctor has mentioned early testing for cognitive decline, and I've noticed myself the moments of confusion, the lost words and thoughts. The final portion of the video was the most difficult to watch. I don't know if I'll still be myself when you see this, she said. I don't know if I'll remember the realizations I've had or the regrets I feel. But I need you to know that I am deeply sorry for the pain we've caused you, for the unequal love we've shown, for the times we've made you feel less valued than your brother. She paused, composing herself. You are extraordinary, Rachel. Your strength, your integrity, your compassion despite how we've treated you, these are rare qualities. I hope someday you can forgive us, but more importantly, I hope you know your own worth, independent of our failure to properly recognize it. The video ended, leaving me sobbing in the quiet of my old room, grieving for the mother who had finally seen the truth but was now losing herself before she could fully make amends. The next morning, I shared the video with my father. He watched in stunned silence, occasionally wiping tears from his eyes. I had no idea, he said when it ended. I never knew she felt this way. I never realized how much we hurt you. It was the beginning of a painful but necessary conversation about the family dynamics that had led us to this point. For the first time, my father fully acknowledged the pattern of favoritism and its devastating consequences for everyone involved. Later that week, with my father's permission, I showed portions of the video to Ethan. His reaction was complex. Shock, shame, and a kind of grief for what our family could have been if these truths had been acknowledged years earlier. I didn't deserve the special treatment, he admitted. And now look where it's gotten all of us. As difficult as these revelations were, they created an opportunity for authentic communication that had been missing from our family for decades. The pretense and denial that had shaped our relationships began to fall away, replaced by painful but honest recognition of the damage that had been done. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. That would take time and consistent change. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which something healthier might eventually be built. The months that followed brought significant changes for everyone in our family. With Ethan's cooperation, we were able to legally document that many of the loans taken in my parents' names were actually for his benefit, transferring liability where possible. While this didn't eliminate the debt, it created clarity about responsibility and protected my parents from some of the worst consequences of his actions. My mother's condition continued to progress, requiring increasingly specialized care. Using a combination of the protected trust funds and our contribution, we secured a place for her in a memory care facility with an excellent reputation. The financial strain was significant, but manageable with proper planning. My father, stripped of the illusions he had maintained for so long, began therapy to address his enabling behaviors and the damage his favoritism had caused. At 72, he was facing a painful reckoning with the choices that had shaped our family dynamics and led to our current circumstances. Ethan's legal case concluded with a plea deal, 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by probation and restitution requirements. Before reporting to serve his sentence, he met with financial counselors to create a plan for addressing his debts upon release. Ashley filed for divorce shortly after his sentencing, moving with their son to California to live with her parents. As for me, I extended my leave of absence from Henderson Financial to remain in Minneapolis temporarily, helping stabilize my parents' situation. Marcus supported my decision completely, traveling to Minnesota on weekends while maintaining his position in Chicago. 6 months after discovering my mother's hidden trust and video message, we found ourselves gathered in Lawrence Green's office for a difficult but necessary family meeting. My father, Ethan, who had been granted permission to attend before beginning his sentence, and I sat facing Lawrence across his polished conference table. "I've asked you all here to discuss how we move forward from this point," Lawrence began. "There are practical matters regarding Diana's care, the family finances, and how responsibilities will be shared going forward." What followed was unlike any family discussion we'd ever had. For the first time, there was no pretense, no attempt to maintain the fiction that had governed our relationships for decades. Instead, there was uncomfortable but necessary honesty about the past and clear-eyed assessment of our present situation. "I can't undo what I've done," Ethan said at one point, his voice steady. "But I can stop causing more damage. When I get out, I'll work to repay what I owe, especially to you, Rachel." My father, looking older than his years, addressed me directly. "I failed as a parent by playing favorites."
I see that now.
"Your mother saw it before I did, but neither of us corrected it. I can't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know I recognize the harm we caused." I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication at having the truth finally acknowledged, grief for what our family could have been, and a cautious hope that something healthier might still be possible. "I needed to hear that," I admitted. "For years, I thought there was something wrong with me, some reason I wasn't as lovable or valuable as Ethan. I worked harder, achieved more, tried to be perfect, and none of it ever seemed to matter." "You were perfect," my father said, his voice breaking. "We were the ones who failed." Lawrence guided the conversation toward practical matters: the ongoing financial arrangements for my mother's care, the management of remaining family assets, and the legal framework that would protect everyone's interests going forward. As the meeting concluded, Ethan asked for a moment alone with me. We walked to a small courtyard outside the law office, sitting on a bench beneath a maple tree beginning to show its fall colors. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he said simply. "Not just for the money or the fraud or dragging everyone down with me. I'm sorry for a lifetime of taking more than my share, of accepting favoritism that wasn't fair to you, of never standing up and saying, 'This is wrong.'" I studied my brother's face, searching for the manipulation I'd grown to expect. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and a humility that had never been part of his character before. "I believe you," I said finally, "but trust will take time to rebuild." He nodded. "I know. I have a lot to prove when I get out. To everyone, but especially to you." 2 days later, Ethan reported to begin serving his sentence. My father and I stood in the driveway as his friend drove him away. "What happens now?" Dad asked, suddenly looking lost. "Now we rebuild," I answered. Not the way things were, because that wasn't healthy, but something new that respects everyone's needs and boundaries. In the year that followed, we did exactly that. Marcus and I returned to Chicago, where we purchased a modest home in a neighborhood we loved. I resumed my career at Henderson Financial, eventually earning another promotion. We maintained regular contact with my father, who visited monthly and made consistent efforts to show interest in our lives and respect for our boundaries. My mother's condition continued to deteriorate, though the quality care she received ensured her comfort and dignity. During lucid moments, She sometimes recognized me and expressed joy at my visits. I treasured these moments while accepting that they would become increasingly rare. My father downsized to a small apartment near my mother's care facility, visiting her daily. He volunteered with an Alzheimer's support group, finding purpose in helping other families navigate the challenges he was facing. The experience seemed to soften him, stripping away the rigid expectations and judgments that had characterized his approach to family. Ethan served his sentence, using the time to complete a degree program offered through the facility and participate in financial literacy and ethics training. His letters showed a consistent commitment to taking responsibility for his actions rather than blaming circumstances or others. Upon his release, he secured modest employment and began the long process of addressing his financial obligations, including regular payments toward the debts he had created in our parents' names. True to his word, he prioritized repaying the money Marcus and I had contributed to stabilize the family situation. More importantly, he respected the new boundaries in our family relationships. He accepted that trust would need to be earned over time through consistent actions rather than promises or emotional appeals. Our relationship slowly evolved into something more balanced than it had ever been before. 2 years after the family meeting in Lawrence's office, Marcus and I welcomed our daughter, Sophia, into the world. My father's joy at becoming a grandfather again was tempered by the knowledge that my mother, though physically present, would never truly know her granddaughter. During his first visit after Sophia's birth, Dad and I sat on our back porch while Marcus put the baby down for a nap. "I've been thinking about what I want Sophia to know about our family," I said. "I imagine you'll want to protect her from knowing how badly we failed you," he replied, his expression pained. I shook my head. "Actually, I want her to know the whole story someday. The favoritism, the betrayal, the car accident, everything. But I also want her to know about redemption, about how people can acknowledge their mistakes and work to do better." Dad looked at me, tears in his eyes. "You're a better person than I ever was." "It's not about better or worse," I said gently. "It's about learning and growing. You're not the same father now that you were 3 years ago. Ethan's not the same brother. I'm not the same daughter. We've all changed." And we had. The painful collapse of our family system had ultimately led to something more authentic and balanced. Not perfect, not without lingering hurt and regret, but honest in a way it had never been before. My mother passed away 6 months later, her body finally following her mind into the darkness of her disease. At her funeral, our reconfigured family stood together in grief. My father, Ethan, Marcus, baby Sophia, and me. The public face of family unity was now matched by a private reality of genuine, if imperfect, reconciliation. In the years since, we've continued building this new family dynamic. My father has become an attentive grandfather to Sophia and a respectful, supportive presence in my life. Ethan has maintained his commitment to financial responsibility and personal growth, gradually rebuilding his life and our trust. The wounds of the past haven't disappeared entirely. On difficult days, I still feel echoes of the pain and rejection that shaped so much of my early adulthood. But those feelings no longer define my understanding of myself or my family. What I've learned through this journey is that true family isn't about blind loyalty or enabling harmful behaviors. It's about honest communication, appropriate boundaries, and the courage to acknowledge when patterns aren't healthy. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is to stand firm in difficult truths rather than perpetuating comfortable lies. If you're watching this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family, know that you aren't obligated to sacrifice your well-being for someone else's poor choices. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for genuine healing. And sometimes, walking away is necessary before any real reconciliation can begin. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content about navigating complex family dynamics. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Share your experience in the comments below. We heal better when we know we're not alone in these struggles. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the integrity and compassion you bring to your own life choices.